Welcome back to Fisher Enclave City, and I hope everyone had a pleasant week. Just to recap on the previous episode, we ended by providing garbage facilities and transportation, which is part 1 of any new expansion. Looking at our RCI demands, we are in dire need to zone more residential housing to accommodate all the Sims that want to live in the beautiful city of Fisher Enclave. We have 2 tiles to fill in, and we only need 5,000 additional population to reach the next milestone and unlock a new tile. Assuming that all the residential housing in the previous tiles are all in their maximum level and can no longer accommodate more Sims, it will not mean that these 2 tiles should only have an additional 5,000 population. If you think about it, it's a little insane to consider that each tile would only have a population of 2.5 residents. You should also take into account of the population requirement of the next milestone, which is at 55,000 population. Therefore, these 3 tiles will need 17,000 population to unlock the 8th tile. But surely, one tile with high density zoning could easily reach 17,000 or over population. But that would be an extremely dense tile with mostly residents that could lead to severe traffic. Then what would you do with the open space? Hence why we plan in other establishments such as a campus, zoo, and whatnot as space fillers. When building your city, it's not just about population and zoning. The city will need a balance with space fillers to keep things interesting and exciting by adding other elements into your city, such as parks, campuses, and unique buildings. This is Captain Ahvious, and welcome to the Advanced Guide to Zoning, which is part 2 in establishing a new expansion. We will divide the zone types into categories. There is of course the residential zoning, where our Sims live and at all costs should avoid being near anything that produces noise and ground pollution. If your residents are near excessive noise and or ground pollution, they would start to complain, and if the issue is not addressed, they would move out, thus abandoning the building. Commercial produces noise, while industries produces both noise and ground pollution. While office zones, trees, other ploppable buildings that does not produce any noise pollution can serve as noise buffers, as long as you place them between your residential and commercial areas. For instance, let's take a look at how I zoned these areas. Notice how I use the office zones to buffer noise from the high density commercial away from the residential area. We could also further reduce the noise by upgrading these roads with trees. Other structures that produces noise are from transportation stations such as trains, metro, monorail, ferries, blimps, and helicopters. There are also other buildings which produces massive amount of noise with a large circumference are stadiums, concerts, and others. The noise pollution are indicated in the building, and the noise does stack with other buildings, meaning even though this media broadcasting building only has 25 noise pollution, but if it was built near the music club that has 25 and a fan zone park with 30 noise pollution, the total clustered area would have 80 noise pollution, which is unbearable for residents. Also consider the noise from the vehicle traffic from roads to stack with buildings. Industries should never be near your residential area because they produce both noise and ground pollution. Garbage facilities such as landfill sites and recycling centers virtually produces minimal noise pollution, but any percentage of ground pollution would cause residents to abandon their homes almost immediately. However, you should also be aware that commercial offices and other unique buildings and services can tolerate both noise and ground pollution. When you look at this chart, it almost appears that we're catering to the needs of the residential area. But let's look at this in another perspective. When you zone your city, it is not necessarily to keep your residents away from the commercial and industrial zoning, but to cluster these pollution-producing structures together. So what we've done is place all the rotten structures in one basket. Therefore, when we look at our new expansion area, we can easily identify that these transportation stations will produce noise and is therefore an opportunity to mix in all the other high noise producing buildings together, such as high density commercial and unique buildings like a stadium. Furthermore, by zoning high density of your transportation station would further reduce the chance of getting that not enough customers alert. Now that we know where the noise and ground pollution is generated, it is much easier to determine where our residential areas should be. Check out how extremely tight that ferry pier is to the quay. It almost appears like we're using Move It mod, but we are not. A disclaimer to the new viewers, this is a vanilla city build. However, the only mods that we are using are visual mods to make the scene more appealing. There are no game-changing mods such as Move It, Traffic Manager, or Anarchy mods. Therefore, if you play on console, PS4, or Xbox, everything you see throughout the Fisher Enclave series can be recreated. Since we know that the monorail station and ferry pier generates noise pollution, we have invited friends over, such as the London Eye unique building, which generates 75 noise pollution. Not only are we gathering our noise producing buildings in one area, we are simultaneously decorating the stations, so it's a much more interesting journey. We are also taking the actual London Eye location as inspiration, much like we reimagined the scene of the Eiffel Tower. Instead of the Sea Life Center London Aquarium building, I am utilizing the City Hall unique building, which isn't as large as the London Aquarium, but it will have to do. And of course, in the background, we can simply add in tourism commercial districts, which are high-rise buildings. This vicinity should be far enough from our noisy neighbors to place in our high-density residential area. Notice how I placed the residents on an elevated terrain instead on the coastline. As much as possible, do not zone any residents on the coastline due to the risk of flooding, especially when you are terraforming in the water. A massive flood would demolish the building, and if it were a max level high density residential building, it would count as part of a death wave. Demolished commercial or office buildings due to flooding is completely fine. They would simply rebuild and it would not affect your population. We will create the district as self-sufficient so we can get the high-rise, high-density residential buildings instead of the European mid-rise structures. And I will also determine that the regular offices to be constructed as an IT cluster. I seem to have forgotten the bare necessity, which is electricity for the buildings to function. It doesn't seem right to live in these fancy apartments and it has no power. Don't mind the messy power line, how it is connected. This is simply a temporary measure that will be resolved in the future. I am making certain that there is one unit space between the avenue and the zoned building, which is my favorite design style. That one unit space will be for a row of trees, which will slightly assist in reducing the noise traffic from the avenue. The only thing that I've missed to include are fences. I placed fences for our Eiffel Tower Champ de Mars garden, but I neglected to continue the fencing throughout the avenue. I will do this offline because it is a repetitive menial task that doesn't need to be recorded. This block has a district zone as tourism specialization, while the rest of the coastline have a district zone as local and organic produce, which is my favorite zone type because of its extremely low level height of the buildings. The local and organic produce zoning helps emphasize the other surrounding zones and structures. Looking back at our real life reference and inspiration, which is made possible with Google Earth, Behind the London Eye is a neat little park. Notice how the park is used as a divider from the rear high-rise buildings, so the London Eye would be further emphasized instead of getting lost in the crowd if it were simply next to other taller buildings. Since we already have a good distance from the tourism buildings, I will instead place our park behind the tourism structures, which is the perfect location to fill in the sloped area. Instead of the slope being a nuisance, it becomes part of the scene, and the slope now also contributes to the overall design. I also favor the generic pavement walking paths because it conforms with the slope terrain and does not cause any cracked edges. An alternate choice would be gravel paths, but pavement paths are definitely much more visible when in top view. Since we are at the midpoint of the entire second season, I can now spend more time in adding fences. When I started the series, my focus was more on city management and function, which is more important than design. Don't take this the wrong way, design is also important, but what is the point of design if the city collapses in on itself? Hence why design comes second. Function will always take precedence over aesthetics. It appears that there is trouble in paradise. Our tourism area are lacking customers, and I am just going to completely ignore that, because I know that we just need to zone more residential to pacify their needs. In fact, I am just going to continue zoning commercial, and I am confident enough that the building issues will resolve over time. Of course, that is terrible advice. If this happens to your city, look at your RCI demand and follow what is needed. I am only continuing to build in this area to reduce the amount of camera movement for the gameplay recording, so this is a content creator choice. But of course, the right move is to zone more residential. I am satisfied that I have built sufficiently in the coastline, and we are now going to pacify that residential housing demand. You may notice that there are large empty gaps, which is intentional and will serve a purpose in the future. For the meantime, we will focus on adding more high-density residential. Oh, look at all those abandoned buildings, and yet I've added more commercial. Before we end this episode, I will give an overall city status tour to see if the city is collapsing or this might just be a temporary hiccup. Try to remember that this is a sloped terrain. Before building anything, always check the terrain to see if you are satisfied with the setup. Unfortunately, the vanilla European buildings are best to use as grid blocks. It would be great if they were versatile to take on different angles, but that is unfortunately not the case. So we will have to make do with what is possible in vanilla gameplay. However, there is one advantage of vanilla European buildings, and that is they are able to conform with slopes. In fact, the European buildings are almost meant to be built on slopes. The buildings look absolutely natural going uphill or downhill. Others may find that their pet peeve for me is how I like to make individual buildings historical. It almost seems illogical and time-consuming. I do admit that it is time-consuming, yet I assure you that it is also logical. For mayors who do not know the purpose of activating the historical building, what it does is it prevents the building model to alter as it levels up. So for example, if from level 1 you make it to a historical building, the structure will level up but the building model will remain as it was level 1, which is most likely the lowest height of the building. I'm aware of the ban high-rise buildings policy, but the building model will still reach level 4, which is relatively tall for certain situations. The European buildings, however, will still always be the same height regardless of level. But what I choose to make historical are buildings with rear windows. I just don't find it appealing where any side of the building is completely flat and tasteless. So I am willing to take that extra step on getting the rear windows for my inner block. And now we are a colossal city with 38,000 population. That's just 5,000 additional population from when we started, and the tile is barely filled in. Let's check out our progress. The coastline had numerous abandoned buildings, and for the most part, the issue was resolved as the city grew. And now let's check the rest of the city, and notice how the notifications are active and visible, so you can clearly see if the city has any massive issues. We have one abandoned building by the coastline, but that is no way alarming. There are some industry buildings that are complaining, such as this, but that is just a delivery delay, so we could ignore that. What is that? What shenanigans is going on here? This has been going on throughout the series, and I am starting to believe that there is a criminal syndicate that is using the logging site as a front. They may not be just chopping wood, and this may not just be sawdust. This is unacceptable. I am the mayor of Fisher Enclave City, and I will not tolerate any criminal activity without being compensated. What is the point of being a mayor if I am not bribed to look the other way? Look how I can make the public look the other way by launching this rocket. There you go. See? Now everybody's looking away and not looking at what's going on here. This is actually connected. There you go. See, it disappeared. Some may think that it's not connected. That is why that is happening. But the truth is, the reason why it is constantly happening on this side is because the nearest police station is about a tile away. So it's gonna take a long while for the police cop car or helicopter to get here. So that is why that alert is constantly happening. And there goes the rocket. Goodbye. What else can I say? A good way to tell if a city is healthy or collapsing is by zooming out, such as this, and you can see and make sure that the notifications are active. If you don't see at least one notification, like a garbage accumulation or something like this, then that means the notifications are deactivated. If something does appear, then that means it's good. So you could tell if the city is okay or if it's not. And if you see alerts such as a large cluster of zone buildings with not enough customers or not enough educated workers or not enough goods, abandoned buildings or death alerts, these are the alerts that every mayor fears. And that's when you can tell that the city is in a terrible state. So what else? Let's actually check the population stats. We have never done that. Now that is a thing of beauty. Even though the population has spikes, but you notice that it's not an actual spike, it's more like a stepladder going upwards. So we have growth instead of the spike going downward and declining. Our growth is actually quite healthy, and this is something that every mayor should aspire to. Our current population is at 38,000 with a traffic flow of 93%. That is pretty good, and this is again without any traffic manager mod, and we will maintain this above 90% traffic flow to over 100,000 population, just like in season 1. But again, it's the amount of notification alerts that tells the truth if your city is thriving or collapsing. Oh wait, we got one abandoned. Yeah, that's just that one guy. If you like the video, hit that thumbs up button, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. Is the video paced too fast, or is it balanced? Did I miss something, or was something unclear? From watching my videos, have your city's gameplay improved? Let me know in the comments below. Until then, have a pleasant day. This is Captain Ahvious. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again in the next episode.